Last module, you all had some interesting comments about the relationship between good citizens and good humans. And there seem to be some questions, though, as to who Aristotle considered good. So Kelly, for example, asked, what ethical issues in Aristotle's day do you think could account for whether a person was considered good or bad? And this is a great question, and it bears on what we'll talk about in this module, so I'd like to say a few words about it. At the beginning of Book 7, Chapter 3 of the Politics, Aristotle defines happiness as a complete activation or action of virtue. Now, what does this mean? Here we need to understand, in answering this question, just what Aristotle means by complete, by activity, and by virtue. So let me start with the latter. A virtue for Aristotle is an excellence of character, being, say, prudent or temperate or courageous. Let me just write down some examples. So we have prudence is a virtue. We have courage is another such virtue. And we have temperance. Temperance. Now, to be happy for Aristotle is to exercise all of these virtues, not just prudence and courage and temperance, but a whole list of all others. And all these virtues have to do with using our reason well in some way. So being temperate, for example, requires pursuing the rational amount of pleasure, while being courageous involves rationally responding to feelings of fear. So each virtue is bound up in some way with our ability to use reason well. Now, these excellences of character, or virtues, are habits that we have formed. They're part of our personality, and as a result, virtuous people perform virtuous acts regularly because they have that kind of character. And in fact, virtuous people become virtuous by practicing virtuous acts, in no other way than by practice. So we can get better at abstaining from fast food, for example, or we become less fearful in the face of danger only through practice. And in order to be happy, Aristotle insists that we must not only have these virtues, but exercise them, right? So that's why he emphasizes the importance of activity, activation, right? We have to do things. And for this reason, Aristotle emphasizes that happiness is just the activity of virtue, not just virtue itself. And when virtuous people regularly act virtuously, when they cultivate a life of virtue, they have made it a complete activity. That's the importance of the completeness. Now, so we tend to think that happiness has to do with having health and money and material goods. And Aristotle would agree to an extent, but he thinks that these are only the necessary means to being happy, but they're not yet constitutive of being happy. So Donald Trump is healthy and wealthy, but he's not happy because he does not act virtuously. Now, because Aristotle thinks of happiness in this way, it should be clearer why he thinks vulgar craftsmen can't be happy. And that's principally because they don't have the time and or the necessary material goods required for practicing virtue. Someone who has to work long hours day after day does not have the opportunity, right, to practice all the virtues. Hard manual labor destroys our ability to cultivate our virtuous use of reason. And think of how many people we all know who work 40+ hours a week and then come home and just want to veg out in front of the TV with a six-pack. That's not, for Aristotle, what it is to be happy.